Recording it so we can share it with other supporters who are not able to join us here today in person. We want to get started first by thanking you so much for your time and continued support. We cannot do what we do to help our neighbors across the state without your dedicated support. So thank you so much for being part of our solution. A couple housekeeping items. First, you'll notice you're muted. That is to help reduce down background noise, but we still want to hear from you. You can use the chat feature to ask questions at any time. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. We recommend that you change your view to the speaker view setting. If you see the top right-hand corner, under the view button, you can select speaker view. This will allow you to see the presentation and the speaker side by side. And with that, we are ready to get started. I'd like to introduce our VP of ROC NH and External Relations, Tara Reardon.
Thank you, Sarah. As many of you know, SB 210, a proposed state law this year, threatened to impose an unreasonable participation threshold to form a resident-owned community or ROC. It would have eliminated a 37-year-old program that has preserved 142 manufactured housing communities. Hang on just a minute. 142 manufactured housing communities with resident ownership, including over 8,500 households. SB 210 was first heard in a Senate hearing on February 8th and listed an impressive list of senators as sponsors. And by their testimony, clearly the senators did not understand our work or the impact the bill would have on the work that we do. Despite that strong Senate support, we, by using our best efforts to educate, along with the testimony of a variety of community loan fund supporters, a dozen letters of opposition from those supporters, and over 400 folks logging in online to oppose the bill, compared to less than 30 for the bill sponsors. We had an incredible show of support from all of you, and our sincere thanks for that. That showing led to successful negotiations with the majority and minority leader in the Senate and the deletion of the most onerous provisions from the bill. The remaining provisions were some good common sense updates and some other minor provisions that won't greatly impact our ROC program. The bill passed the committee and the full Senate on a voice vote and has moved over to the House, where the subcommittee passed it intact. The work session held by the subcommittee was another good opportunity to do education of policymakers, but we've also identified that we have a lot of work to do. The committee has now sent the bill to the full House, where it will be heard the first week of May and voted on, and will remain vigilant to ensure no amendments resurface those harmful provisions. Thanks again for your support. We'll keep you informed of the outcome of that bill. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Saltzman, our President and CEO. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Tara, and I want to thank you for your leadership on SB 210, and I want to thank everybody who's joining this webinar today, but I also want to thank everybody who lent their voice to ours in opposing this bill. It required us to do things that we haven't had to do in 38 years, but it'll certainly be something that we'll have to engage in more looking forward. This issue of minority business lending, it's both because of the heritage of CDFIs who trace their origins to the civil rights movement, but I mean, it's also a response to what is becoming increasing racial inequality in the state of New Hampshire, as well as the country writ large. But it's also where our work is very much informed by the questions you've been asking us, the people that lend money to the Community Loan Fund and donate to our work. I'm very struck by a comment that Deb Miller made last week, and she really seized on this question about which loans are risky. Like, why is lending to minorities risky? And she said, when you do that, you completely dehistoricize how events in American history and how federal policy has shaped wealth inequality between Blacks and whites in America. And that she sort of insisted that our work not only acknowledge that history, but that we sort of work to sort of upend the structural problems that face it. Essentially, her challenge was, that we do very much the same things that made us successful in affordable home ownership, that we apply that to minority business lending. Before I even got to New Hampshire, I, like so many other people in community development finance, knew about ROC NH and about our single family home mortgage program, Welcome Home Loans. But I'll argue the real innovation of those two programs is not necessarily the programs, it's the rejection of received wisdom that informed affordable home ownership in America and how we sort of finance it. It is an article of faith, even among progressive circles, that co-ops don't work with low wealth people, that you can only do food co-ops in wealthy neighborhoods. You can only do co-op apartment buildings among the wealthy. Well, as Tara and ROC and H have proven, we have 142 ROCs that prove that that simply isn't true. And it spawned off a national nonprofit, ROC USA, that has taken the learnings from New Hampshire across the country. If you talk to people around the country, even progressives and CDFIs will believe that you cannot finance manufactured housing like a stick-built home. You have to finance it like a car. Our lending and our performance in our program, we have hundreds of loans that prove that isn't true. So how do we apply those same learnings into minority business lending? Well, some of this history is going to be very familiar to everybody on the call, so I'm going to run through it quickly. I'm not going to go back to 1619, I promise. In the Great New Deal in 1934, the Federal Home Administration announced a program that we now know as redlining, where it really designated where you could get a government-backed mortgage. And it was largely in white neighborhoods and was explicitly not in Black neighborhoods. A year later, the Federal Home Loan Bank solidified these same regulations, and where it would lend money, that you could get money from the federal government to do home mortgages in what were essentially white neighborhoods, but not in Black neighborhoods that they deemed dangerous and risky. Well, if you think generationally, what is the impact and the downstream consequences? Of course, you had schools, which had higher property taxes in those white communities. Grocery stores were built in those communities, not in the neighborhoods that were rental. And if you think about how homes appreciate, you can see how generational wealth was built in white communities, and then Black homeowners, the few that were there that had their homes in low wealth neighborhoods, did not get that same impact. Well, you think going into the Great Recession of 2008, what happened there? We know that Black families were 4 times as likely as white families to have their homes foreclosed on. For Hispanic families, it was 2.6 to 1 for white families to have their homes foreclosed on. If you think about a product that if you bought a car from car maker X and 9 out of 10 cars blew up, you wouldn't blame the people who bought the cars, you'd blame the car maker. But as a consequence of all this, we saw this mortgage explosion in 2008. It turned out to be the greatest transfer of wealth in American history, from Black and brown families losing their wealth. For those Black and brown families that kept their homes, but they suffered more depreciation than those of white homeowners. So it meant those families, when they went to go buy a car, had to pay higher prices for those cars because of higher car loans. They had to go to the subprime car market. Many often found themselves in payday lending and having to pay other consequences because their balance sheets were greatly reduced. Go to the present in the pandemic. We know that almost 48% of Black-owned businesses went out of business in the last 2 years as a result of the pandemic. The Payment Protection Program that was intended to provide assistance and did miraculous things and kept the economy afloat. Almost 80% of white-owned businesses were able to get PPP loans, as opposed to 42% of Black-owned businesses. So what is the Community Loan Fund trying to do to upend that? When I described some of the things that we think we've learned and some of the actions we've taken, we promoted one of our staffers from the ROC NH program, Zach Palmer, to see if he could apply some of the lessons learned from ROC NH to this issue of minority business lending. We've gone back to some teachings from a law professor by name of John Powell, who teaches at Berkeley, and he's the one who did the pioneering work almost 35 years ago on structural racism and looking at the impacts, of redlining. He argued with borrowers that you had to differentiate, who was incompetent from who was incomplete. Essentially, his challenge was to say, don't do what bankers are expert at, looking at where balance sheets are weak and all the credit risk, but look at the assets that particularly African-American borrowers might have, not what they don't have. So we're looking at that. While we think that we've got great experience here, we believe to be successful in minority business lending that we have to be authentically community driven. And I think as an industry, CDFIs, this is one of the places where we get it wrong more often than not. So we've launched a joint venture with the NAACP in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it's a pilot where we can learn not only about the projects that need financing, but the same way that we do with our single family mortgages and the same way we do with Rock and H, that we have to believe that our work begins when we close a loan, it doesn't end when we close a loan. So we're going to try to develop an extensive technical assistance program with our community partners in Manchester and really sort of figure out what is the technical assistance that's needed and what are the projects that need financing. The last piece I want to talk about with our program is that our theory of social change, at least now, is that if we're going to engage in some sort of reverse redlining, the best way to stop gentrification, the best way to stop displacement of Black-owned businesses from the communities that they help build is to help them buy the dang building. But this is not only going to create stability, but create the bedrock of multi-generational wealth. Zach's going to walk through a couple of the loans that we've done and talk about the things we've learned about the borrowers and how we've sort of applied some of the lessons from Rock and H and our Welcome Home Loan program to trying to, create some opportunities for Black-owned businesses and try to shrink, this racial wealth gap in New Hampshire. Before I turn it over to Zach, I'm going to share a story that I relayed to the staff last week. There have been if I think about the two biggest learning experiences for me since I moved to New Hampshire. One was canvassing in a rock that I was trying to organize. I knew that we dealt with people that were below wealth, but what I learned on that day was that we're really dealing with people who make 30% of area median income or lower, and how close the line between solvency and insolvency so many people that we work with are. While the pandemic response has saved so many people and their balance sheets have gotten stronger, for the people that we are really trying to reach and help people keep their homes, they're much closer to the edge. The other experience is one when I first moved to New Hampshire. I went to go visit a farm that was essentially a residential facility for disabled adults. And when I got there was a young woman working in the field. She's, what's this guy doing with a sport coat on a really hot day? And I said, we came for the community loan fund. And she said to me, I'm one of your investors. And this woman couldn't be a day more than 25 years old. What does she make? $30,000 max? And this woman who could have done anything with her money, I think about what I do with my money when I was 25, and she chose us to make us a loan so that we could address the state's most compelling problems. And I think about her generation and their concerns. I think about her often. Like this program, I think we have a certain accountability to that 25-year-old, as we do to all of you that are attending this webinar. And that our program with minority business lending, it has to be authentic, and it has to be as structurally informed and as historically informed as our Rock and H work and our Welcome Home Loan work. I think that's the obligation we have to her, and we have to the people and the people in New Hampshire that have been economically disenfranchised. And if we're going to be sincerely trying to eliminate the racial wealth gap, this is what we're going to have to do. But anyway, Zach is the one who's been leading our work here. So I want to turn it over to him. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending. My name is Zachary Palmer. I'm the community business lender for the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. I joined the organization back in 2019 as a technical assistance provider and acquisition specialist for the Rock and H program, resident-owned communities, New Hampshire. This may be a topic many do not think about often. For those present today, there seems to be interest, and for that, I want to say thank you. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund or myself are not the experts in talking about the structural barriers put in place around racism and slavery in America. Unfortunately, we aren't the only ones talking about it either. As Steve mentioned, this topic is, however, related to our work as a CDFI, given our roots stemming from the civil rights era and the latter war on poverty movements. No matter the terminology, Black, Indigenous, person of color, diversity, equity, or inclusion, JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, or inclusion, it's all rooting from the civil rights movement of the 1960s, led by many African Americans who, when after almost 100 years of being free, were still facing barriers to the American dream through Jim Crow era laws and segregation. Although there have been generations of enslaved and freed African Americans present in New Hampshire, which, if you're looking to learn more, our nonprofit borrower, the Black Heritage Trail, would be a great person and organization to look to. We have not been present in an equitable manner, have had welcomed opportunities to create equitable change without scrutiny or fear of perhaps not being able to move up the economic ladder. And unfortunately, historical stereotypes, biases tend to lead to many Protestants, Anglo-Saxon, Eastern European descendants to group many of us together, whereas many of us coming from different parts of the country have different lived experiences and are not a part of the descendants of the formerly enslaved people like myself. Immigration is not new to New Hampshire, however, given the history of the New Hampshire mills in the early 19th century. That population has shifted from majority white countries like Canada, Ireland, or Greece to war-torn countries in the Middle East and Africa. Depending on who you ask or where you read, New Hampshire's white population ranges 89% to 93% white. A report from the New American Economy in 2016 states that 6% of New Hampshire residents are immigrants, also 8% of residents being native-born US citizens with at least one immigrant parent. New Hampshire is late to the culture demographic change seen close in southern cities like Lawrence, Lowell, Boston, or Providence, where I'm from. There are estimates that over 130 different languages are spoken across the state school systems, meaning that when someone is typically thinking of someone who is Black, Indigenous, or a person of color in New Hampshire, they are actually thinking of the new or 1 to 2 generations removed from the native non-American country person. This is not to say, again, that New Hampshire does not and has not had its representation of the traditional African American citizen here. That population has, however, been silent whether to assimilate with majority white environments in order to grow in the circle of wealth, not knowing or being left out of the access to the capital and resources in order to help them get into the circle. And the reality is that the traditional African American needs assistance. This project has 2 objectives: to assist all entrepreneurs of color in New Hampshire, both the new American, traditional American, African American, and create equity and further their business goals. The initiative we are speaking about today is about joining the efforts of all entrepreneurs' mindsets, minorities or white, whether having come to America voluntarily or involuntarily, many generations ago or just last month. I'm now going to talk about some recent progress we've been able to make in just the first half year of this program of the Community-Driven Economic Empowerment Project in Manchester. The photo you're seeing, I'd like to introduce Mercy of God African Market, our first loan as part of this new initiative. Beatrice Adekoya started Mercy of God 18 years ago after immigrating from West Africa. They sell cultural staples like cassava flour, oils, dried fish, goat, and their native country's spices. For 18 years, they managed a steady business with loyal, dedicated customers. Mercy of God has long served as a gathering place for many African immigrants, a place where they can feel a sense of home and belonging. Beatrice Adekoya, with help from her husband and family, did all this while keeping her books in a pen and paper fashion, only accepting cash, and they ran this business successfully without taking credit cards. In 2021, their landlords raised their rent, and the next best option was for Beatrice to purchase a piece of real estate. Because she didn't know how to do QuickBooks, have proper financials in place in electronic format, didn't take credit cards, she wasn't exactly bankable. In fact, Beatrice barely had a relationship with the bank further than just a deposit account. So when programs like PPP or Main Street Funds or EIDL were brought out to the public, she didn't know or either didn't even have the technology and proper things in place to apply for those programs, much like their white counterparts. However, through common relationships and the understanding of by both the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and another financial institution, we were able to get creative and find a solution. New Hampshire Community Loan Fund started working with her right away, and we recognized that this was a successful business, but she needed some technical assistance to take it to the next step. We helped her with an accountant, obtain a point of sale service, a credit card machine, and instruction and coaching on how to use that. We helped her buy the building, now on Elm Street in downtown Manchester, so that her business will be secure for the long term and grow. I'm going to share another story here of a more recent loan we've done. This is a person who's moved to New Hampshire 20 years ago from a more populated and diverse place, New York City. Came to settle in New Hampshire, the western part, because he loved the feeling and the beauty of it. He always been fascinated by antiques and collectibles. One day he found a barn and had a dream. I'll let him tell the rest.
We are in the Forest of Time Vintage Memories, and we're located at 35 Spring Street in Newport, New Hampshire. The Forest of Time is not the typical antique shop. It's a place that you can come to and truly feel at home when you walk in here. August of 2015, when I found the building, I took these photos here. When I first saw the barn, it was disgusting, filled with lots of junk. Most people would just run away. I saw what it could be. I envisioned it to be my home and my business space, a creative center. I got into a 5-year lease to purchase the property. My 5th year was this past August, where I had to pay it off, otherwise lose it. With New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, they came in and they saw what's happening, what it can be, and what it is already.
The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, we're here to be a bridge, a gap filler for people of color, minority-owned businesses of color. Now our community-driven economic empowerment program that's starting off here in Manchester is to connect people to technical assistance resources. The minority-owned business lending program, which is the statewide initiative, is to do the same where people of color aren't typically thought of being.
Well, Zachary came over. He was blown away by the place. He was blown away by what I've accomplished here.
He's smart and business savvy in the way he's running his business. We're here to just guide him along, help him create better technical assistance relationships and create other avenues of revenue for him.
It was very easy to work with them because they believed in me and they believed in what I'm doing right here. But if I need their help, I know that they're there for me.
We're giving someone who's traditionally been left out of access to capital, who may happen to be low to moderate income, not have a relationship with a traditional bank, further their business, create equity by purchasing a piece of real estate, and stay in the community where they're adding a diverse culture and attraction for everyone.
It's a forest of time, a place that you would want to come to. You've got to invest in people who are trying to help bring about a change in your community. You got to invest in them. You got to get out of that box, because you lose a lot by being in that box. You lose a lot of good people, you know? And New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is a group of people that actually think out of the box, and they're helping a lot of great people to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, and it's helping everybody that's in that community.
As you just saw, Jesse's loan is an example of how the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is not fitting into the box, as he stated. We do this by listening to our borrowers, listening to our partner technical assistance providers in this case, which was the New Hampshire Small Business Development Center, listening to members of the Newport community with having institutional ties to the town of Newport through the Resident-Owned Communities New Hampshire program. And in order to help lead to larger economic revitalization of the town while also ensuring there's an equitable representation. The Minority-Owned Business Lending Program was designed to give minority entrepreneurs a place to turn and build success statewide. While the Community Loan Fund has always made loans to businesses owned by people of color, the Organization for Refugee and Immigrant Success, Black Heritage Trail, Saigon Market, Yasso Jamaican Grill, and Juba International Market, for examples. 2 years ago, like many others, we decided that we could do more and create more impact. Here are some statistics for you. If people of color owned and operated businesses at the same proportion of white people, The potential is astounding. In August 2020, the Boston Federal Reserve Bank estimated that people of color could add up to 32,000 companies in New England and create 260,000 jobs. Immigrants start nearly 30% of new businesses, but are only 13.2% of the population. Immigrants as Entrepreneurs Forum stated that the United States Office of Refugee Resettlement has an active program in New Hampshire, but the demographics are changing. In Manchester, 43% of those under 18 are minorities. While there is an increasing amount of attention paid to lending to people of color, the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund program combines three important elements we've always followed. Community building, capacity building, technical assistance, and access to capital to help make a small business successful for the long term. Unlike other programs, it is statewide. There is no capital loan ceiling. There are loans for real estate, equipment, working capital, and there's an extensive third-party TA technical assistance element added. In addition to the statewide program, we decided to go deep into Manchester. We are working in partnership with the Manchester NAACP, its president, James McKim, and calling this program Community-Driven Economic Empowerment, or CDEE. It's been 2 years in the making, and it's involved interviewing over 45 business owners, mostly of color. Businesses targeted included the skilled trades, plumbers, hair salons, car repairs, restaurants, and retail markets. From extensive interviews conducted with minority and business owners last summer, we learned that the entrepreneurial spirit runs high, but many of these businesses do not have banking relationships, do not know where to turn for capital or the technical assistance resources to help their businesses grow. To gather this data, we worked with the Deo Moano consultancy, Deo Moano, and a team of 3 other interviewers who performed the interviews mentioned before. This research showed that while small, businesses run by people of color have great relationships with their customers because they provide key cultural staples, have strong entrepreneurial drive, like Mercy of God African Market. They often lack banking relationships, as I mentioned, face challenges with technology, with bookkeeping, and knowing or talking to more often other technical assistance providers like lawyers, CPAs, and other advisors around the states. They also don't feel connected as a group with each other or associations within their industry, like a Chamber of Commerce. Both our statewide and Manchester program are here to provide technical assistance and flexible capital to help businesses succeed while fostering the growing diverse business ecosystem in New Hampshire. We're working with 8 other third-party technical assistance providing firms, organizations that are looking to reach these businesses as well. The Community-Driven Economic Empowerment Project is meant to spur and organize the collaboration of all these partners in order to make a greater impact for the businesses starting in Manchester and showing hints of growing elsewhere. Community-Driven Economic Empowerment Program also includes a new business council made up of advisors of people of color and borrowers in the Manchester community. This group can refer businesses to the program, also develop a peer-to-peer network in order to share best practices. There are currently 5 businesses on the council, with 4 more expected to join. To show our commitment to Manchester, we opened an office on Amherst Street and are already working with 15 area businesses in terms of technical assistance and coaching. We expect that between 4 and 6 will take loans out this year. To wrap things up, the Community Loan Fund has had a long track record of helping people of low wealth obtain safe, affordable housing and expand their businesses. We know how to work with borrowers with poor credit or no credit. As an investor as well as a lender, we can deliver the full range of financing options from debt, sub-debt, royalty, equity, and we match that with grants in order to achieve the technical assistance that these business owners need. We are creative in finding risk mitigation strategies that we don't have to rely simply on collateral. What also helps is having someone who can relate and look like these business owners with a keen business acumen. Our small business program is based on the following foundational principles. We listen to the business owner, match owners to a robust network of advisors to help them obtain the right kinds of business training and marketing help, and also other technical assistance they may need in order to access the right kind of capital. Lastly, we want to help disseminate the racial biases and stigmas around many people of color. Just last week, the New Hampshire ACLU released a study in 2020 that Black people in New Hampshire, whether African American or new African American, were 4.8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. These aren't risky businesses plagued by stigma of loose banking regulations of the 1980s and the 2010s. or businesses posing as fronts for illegal activities or operating without proper permits or licenses in place, or risky loans in the sense of credit underwriting lens of having little to no collateral or structures in place to help them get there. These are businesses that provide specialty items and services to their diverse cultures and communities, but have historically misunderstood credit track records from a traditional lender. These creative, larger, economy-stimulating business owners are typically 2 to 3 generations behind their white counterparts from either just being made aware of the strategies and relationships that can help create and keep generational wealth, or not knowing them at all. We will see this work spill over into our other programs, as Steve mentioned, like Welcome Home Loan and the resident-owned communities, and also our nonprofit lending to make lasting societal and individual equity-creating structures in place to make sure that this diversity, equity, inclusion work that we do is not just checking off the box or what's just grabbing the headlines. And lastly, I want to say thank you to our supporters who have helped make this work happen. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. The grants, the investments, and as always, the Community Loan Fund thanks you. I now want to pass it over to Pam Hawks, Director of Donor Relations.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's amazing to hear about the wonderful work that is happening across the state. I hope that this inspires you to share these stories with others. The great work that you just heard about could not have happened without the support of our donors, our investors, and entities that provide us grants. If you are wondering how you can make an impact on this work, don't worry, there are plenty of ways. First, you could consider a donation or a grant that would help support specialized education and training for our borrowers. Programs like these are essential to the success of our borrowers. You could also make a donation or a grant to support our flexible lending pool. Donations for this purpose are loaned out over and over and allow us to support our borrowers with lower interest rates. Also, please do not forget that giving through your donor advised fund, a gift of stock, or naming the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund in your estate planning is also an option that we would love to talk to you more about. Our investors continue to be strong partners in the support of our mission. Opportunity New Hampshire Investments give potential investors with as little as $1,000 the opportunity to invest in New Hampshire communities and earn a fixed rate of interest in return. And many investors choose a 0% rate. One of the trends that began before COVID and that has increased during the pandemic. By doing this, it helps us to provide lower interest loans to our borrowers. We would be happy to provide you more information with any of these ways of giving. We are starting to create more opportunities to come together, not only via Zoom, but also in person. We would love to have you join us at any of these events and make sure that you bring a friend. Or if you'd be interested in helping us organize an event in your community, we would love to talk to you about this. My contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation, but I'll also drop it in the chat for anyone to grab. Again, we could not do what we do without the continued support of our donors, investors, and those that provide us grant funding. Thank you for being a part of the solution. I would now like to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Pam and the team. Now that we've learned about minority-owned business lending and had an update on SB 210, it is your opportunity to ask some questions. So I see we have one in the chat already, but if you have other questions, please, you can raise your hand, we can unmute you, or you can also add them to the chat. I'm going to get started with the first one that's already in the chat, and I'm going to pass that over to Tara. The question says, I do wonder about what's happening at the national level with hedge funds buying up and flipping parks.
Thank you for that question. That has been a headline grabber lately, and that is happening nationwide, that private equity is seeing manufactured housing parks as not neighborhoods where people live, but great investments, and they are not attached to the people. We, with all of your support this year, opposed SB 210, which was an assault on that right to purchase by residents. And we are lucky here in New Hampshire that we have a good track record with that, that bill, but nationwide, the opportunity to purchase is the first defense that residents have against that, that private equity money. There's also a little more complicated piece of that, and that is the GSEs, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, who are doing really low-cost loans to investor owners of manufactured housing parks that the next investor comes along and assumes, but the residents are not situated under those guidelines to assume those loans. We think that is a travesty, and we hope to make some impact on that in the upcoming year. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the question.
Merritt, you have a question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. That was an awesome presentation. I learned a lot, and it's really exciting what you all are up to. In a prior conversation, I heard a little bit about what you're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion as an organization. So a lot of this conversation is centered on the borrower level, but I'd love to hear more about what you're doing as an organization.
Go
I
ahead,
can,
and then Rich Jen. Yeah.
I can speak to that. Thank you, Merritt, so much for that question. Organizationally, we really make it a priority and part of our values, striving to model equity and inclusion. So this happens in our lending, as you could hear from the great stories that Zach was sharing. It also happens internally. And in the past 3 years or so, we've gone through some training and deep learning with some of the best in the area around building a culture of belonging, training on implicit bias, training on hiring for diversity, for microaggressions. And we started out as a small group and built that to everybody in the organization optionally. And at this point, truly the whole organization is going through this deep learning together. That part of the outcome of that was the most diverse recruiting and hiring year that we have ever had, both for our staff and our board, which we think just adds value when we have diverse voices at the table at every level, at racial diversity and ethnic and religion and native speakers of other languages and people with disabilities. All of that adds to the richness of what we can do together, truly building the culture of belonging so that people can be fully engaged, both as the staff here and the board, and that informs our work, right, about how our lending lands in the community. So we expect this to be long-term work, and but we're I think as an internal team really proud of the investment organization-wide.
Jen, I'm just going to jump in a little bit because I want to mention some of the names that we're working with in case there are other organizations that may want to piggyback. We are spending an entire year with our entire staff doing DEI training with Jermaine Moore of the Mars Hill Group. Our senior managers and everybody's a supervisor is doing specific training on implicit bias, and we're doing on a monthly basis with an employment attorney named Talisha St. Mark, who's excellent as well. We're also working with a group out of Seattle, led by Luis Ortega, called Storytellers for Change. And the ostensible purpose being, we're going to do 4 additional trainings. We've already done a training that involved our board as well as our staff, being that if we can learn to tell our own stories, we're going to become better equipped at listening to each other's. And we had to do this work with Storytellers for Change to make our DEI trainings with Jermaine Moore, which happened throughout the year, successful. Thank you for that question.
We have a lot of good questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to take them one at a time now. We have a question from Jeanette. In addition to your partnership with the NAACP and your CDEE Business Council, what kind of outreach do you do to find these businesses? Maybe Zach?
Yeah, so the Manchester NAACP, with help from Citizens Bank and the Center for Women's Enterprise, luckily developed a list of minority-owned businesses in Manchester. So that's one way that we can find these business owners. Also, I live in the Manchester community. I frequently stop into these places, so I'm able to develop a relationship through the organic way, word of mouth, of course. And we have been doing some press releases as well that people have seen, able to get a hold of us. Of course, we're looking into other ways to reach more, whether it's not, marketing efforts online, etc. But partnering with the organizations who are, one, doing the like work and also want to be in this community with us is a key way. So the Small Business Development Center of New Hampshire has been a key one for sure. And of course, Manchester on NAACP. I see another question here. As of date, we haven't had to deny any loans. We do, of course, have to formally deny, but we, of course, invite people to come back and apply. We work with them to do the technical assistance part. A lot of our loans need pre-development work to get these businesses loan ready. These business owners understand that, whether it's correcting their taxes, needing to get financials audited, or just waiting in time for equity to be brought in, or us to make sure we have our safeguards in place so that we can make sure our loans are going to go back to pay back our investors. I also see a question here about Yasso Jamaican Grill. I think I'm going to pass it to Betsy Siegel to answer
that. Good morning. I'm Betsy Siegel, or good afternoon. Ed, do you have a specific question on Yasso Jamaican Grill? That's one of our portfolio borrowers.
I can read it for you, Betsy, if you want. The question is, will the owner operator of the grill be on today? Or the question's from Ed Toomey. He might have a more specific question, but he's wondering about that business in Keene. Ed, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Good. I did also mention I want to make a few comments before I ask my question, if we have the time. Looks like we maybe do. I was a member of the board for 9 years, including being chair for 3 years during that difficult period, as Steve already mentioned, around 2008. And we got through it okay. And I think one of the things that got through it has been a characteristic of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund that I've always been proud of and excited by, and it was no different today, and that is the stories we tell. And Zach, I haven't met you yet, but you fit right into the mold that we established, that was established before I got there, but I was always praising it and encouraging it more, that so much of what moves people to become investors and donors are these stories that we tell. And I was so touched by the one about Jesse. I used to be moved to tears by the stories, and I wish I could say I've grown up at 85, but I haven't. I was moved again to tears today, just watching his pride and what he's done and what he's doing and what you've all done to help that and to move him along. So I just want to thank you all for continuing a marvelous tradition, and please continue it. My question, I note that the grill, the Jamaican Grill in Keene, located itself in a prime spot. For those of you who do or don't know Keene, we pride ourselves for having very few empty storefronts in our downtown area. The last few years have brought us a few more than we ever have had before, but boy, that spot that the Jamaican Grill occupied wasn't free for felt like about 2 minutes when it moved up the street, and then the grill moved into that marvelous spot in the 50 block of Main Street, and it looks like it's doing really well so far. I hope it is, and that's what I wanted to ask the owner operator if he or she were here. But absent them, what is it that brought the two together? That group that opened the grill and the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and how is the funding being used to help establish the business?
Oh, hi, Ed. Yes, I can answer that. So Yasso Jamaican Grill is owned by Gail Summers, and no, she's not on today. Gail is a native of Jamaica, and she wished to share her Jamaican cuisine and family recipes, and had a vision of uniting people around food and culture. And as As said, the first location opened in 2019, and in 2020, Gail had the opportunity for this larger, very visible prime location. Well, we all know what was happening in 2020. There was a pandemic going on, and in-house dining, restaurant dining had been shut down. But Gail saw this opportunity, and despite the challenges of the pandemic, she went ahead with moving to the new location. Gail was one of the early adopters of online delivery, online ordering and takeout, and was able to bridge the business until sit-down dining was allowed again. And met with the Community Loan Fund. We provided a loan for leasehold improvements for the new location. We also provided a technical assistance grant to purchase of a new POS, or purchase of sale system for the business, and have worked closely with Gail. And despite all those challenges, the business is doing well. And if anyone would like, if braised beef, oxtail, or coconut rice, or jerk chicken sounds good, you have to check out Yasso Jamaican Grill. And one thing that I learned recently is what Yasso means in Creole, and it means right here. And it's such a perfect name, because it's a place you want to be. So I would encourage everyone to go to Keene and check out the restaurant.
Terrific. Thank you, Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy. I'm going to stick on the business questions for just a minute here. Another question says, what are the barriers for business owners to joining networking organizations such as the Chamber of Commerce? Hand that back to you, Zach.
Yeah, for one thing, it's them seeing a benefit of paying these membership fees, knowing what they're going to get out of it, feeling welcomed, seeing, again, other people who look like them within the organization, association. So those are really the main two barriers. And then also the organization being welcoming itself as well. Obviously, historically, really white state here in New Hampshire. The makeup of the population of these cities like Manchester, Nashua, where 50% of people of color in New Hampshire live, the rest are outside of those two cities. They need to be more welcoming and look into their structural. It also kind of goes into the second question I see down there. How do we ensure these businesses and leaders don't remain segregated long term through their own organizations, such as the council? We need to lead to structural changes. Organizations looking at their policies, their procedures, making sure they're meeting the demographics that they serve within their community. The demographics are ever changing. People have been really going through it with the last couple of years of COVID. Low to moderate income people are really struggling with the rental market and housing market. So it takes organizations being able to look at themselves and say, what are we doing in order to meet this population that we want to serve?
Thanks, Zach. Looks like we have one more in here. And the question is, I guess goes back to Tara. So are you advocating through Rock USA to Congress? I assume this is about the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae question that you...
We are working with Rock USA, and they have identified and made some connections with new leadership at FHFA. And we also have talked directly to our congressional delegation in a conversation that Debbie Miller and I had last week with Senator Shaheen's office. They reach out often, wondering what's going on with us, and we surface that as one of the issues. It really is a fairness under the duty to serve of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's to take a closer look at manufactured housing and make sure they're working in that space. And we just need to point out that working in that space doesn't mean necessarily helping the investor community at the expense of the residents. So it's on their radar now, and often there are abilities to comment, opportunities to comment, and Jen Hopkins has done that for us a couple of times. when those opportunities, and we'll continue to reach out to the new leadership and hopefully get an ear of the FHFA. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. It looks like that might be it for questions. Give one more second. All right, well, we'd like to thank you all so much for your time today. We've heard from many of you that these webinars are extremely beneficial, and we've truly designed them with you in mind. This is a first in a series of webinars that are going to dive deeper into our programs to bring awareness of the impact they have across New Hampshire. And here's a couple more, as Pam showed earlier as well. Please keep an eye out for the next webinar. We'll be announcing it soon. We hope you can join us and invite anyone who might be interested. If you have questions, sometimes after, right, you think later today, oh, I wish I asked this question, please reach out to us. Here's some information about who you can contact, and also through our website as well. Thank you again so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all.